Thank you very much. Lena, if they can turn the lights, because they blind me, and maybe they can turn on the backlights. Thank you very much for the invitation. And she exaggerated a lot, but we'll continue with it. So what I'll do, I'll divide my talk into two parts. In the first part, I'll tell you in a non-technological language what we did. And then I'll move to my other hat, which is medicine. As Lena told you, I'm a physician. I was trained in surgery and then decided to move on to science. So let's start with the first part, and that's what we really did. This is a beautiful city where I was born and have lived most of my life. The medical school is here and the teaching hospital is here. And the Baha'i people from Iran selected Haifa as their new capital. So they were persecuted in Iran. They moved the body of the founder to the prophet and the administrative leader to Haifa and to Akko, which is a city 20 kilometers north of Haifa, and they buried them in beautiful shrines that is surrounded by gorgeous gardens, and they are, just to keep the garden, there are 100 gardeners on site daily in order just to take care, and the gardens really cover the whole slope of the Carmel mountain, which is kind of the symbol of the city. So here you can see the shrine in Haifa. Akko is up there in the bay. So what we did is our business is proteins, and proteins are the little machines that run our body. There are about 20,000 or so different proteins that play the most beautiful symphony that you have ever heard. I call it the symphony of life. And magically, they play it without a conductor. Every protein knows exactly what to do, when to do. And most of the proteins, I would say 98% are acting without we even knowing about it. The very few proteins that we control are, for example, my tongue proteins and my muscles, you know, when I talk to you, thinking, probably operating some proteins in the brain, but all the rest is behind us. We don't know even what's going on. We don't control the kidneys when they make the urine. We don't control the gastrointestinal tract when they digest the food and absorb all the nutrients. We don't control the heart. It just pumps blood, brings oxygen to the tissues, takes carbon dioxide to the lungs, and so on. So it's unbelievable machine if you think about the complexity of it. The antibodies that immunize us against all the diseases are also, everything is done behind, and we devote very little effort into what makes a human being. Think about it kind of philosophically. So the proteins are chains. They are made of building blocks. Again, I will try to avoid the technological jargon just to show you, to give you the principle. So here is one amino acid and the second and the third. Doesn't matter how they are built, and it's a chain. And each amino acid is different from the other, and they build the proteins, and the proteins are like words in language, except that they are very long words. So in average words, German is a little bit, the average word is a little bit longer than in Hebrew, but 5 to 8 letters. The language of proteins is about hundreds of letters in each word, and they are coded genetically. So it's very important, like in any language. It's right. It's essential to spell the word right. So mother, for example, must be M-O-T-H-E-R. You cannot put after M, you cannot put an A because it will be a mutation in the word, right? It should be M-O and not M-A, though we are hearing mother. So the same is for proteins. All the amino acids need to be at the right order in order to function. If there is a mistake in the order, it's called a mutation, and many mutations lead to diseases. We shall talk about it. Then the proteins, so this is called the primary sequence, so the order of the letters. Then come a secondary structure. You see that these amino acids make helices, then they are folded in the space, and then several proteins make a complex of a protein. For example, the red blood protein, the hemoglobin, is made of 2 different chains, and so on. So they have a very complex structure. So the complex structure is needed for the function, but on the other hand, it's also an Achilles heel in their structure because they are extremely sensitive. They are extremely sensitive to, by the way, the proteins, before we go to the Achilles heel, they fulfill all the functions. As a matter of fact, if you want to think of life philosophically, there are two dimensions. The longitudinal dimension is the genetic material that we are inherit to our children, right? Or in the zoology, in the living world, or in the plants, it's to the next generation. But the horizontal life is run by the proteins. So all the activities, all our functions are run by proteins. So one dimension is the longitudinal one, and the other one is the horizontal one, and they fulfill all the functions. So we talked about blood carrying oxygen. We talked about antibodies, the antibodies that immunized us against COVID-19 just recently, of course, are proteins. The muscles are made of proteins. The bones, the structure that hold us straight and made of proteins. So basically we are made of, as I said, of around a little bit more than 20,000 different proteins that are all together enable life. And the proteins are made of the amino acid, but the order of the amino acid, as I said, the correct writing is dictated by the genetic material. So this is the central dogma of biology. It's a very primitive way. Now it's much more complicated. So the information flows from DNA to RNA and then to protein. And here you can see 3 amino acids that are linked together. But of course, as I said, the chain is much longer. And the proteins are very sensitive. They are very sensitive to heat, not to the external heat, but even to the internal heat. We are living in a very high temperature. We are living in 37 centigrade. And proteins don't like this temperature. Actually, when you buy a protein, you don't know that you buy a protein, but when you go to the butcher and buy meat, you buy protein. When you buy cheese, you buy protein. When you buy eggs, you buy proteins. So they are extremely sensitive to temperature, and therefore the temperature misfold them. It does other things, but it misfold them. Think about an egg. What I said here is that it's very easy to fry an egg, but try to unfry it. You will never be successful. Never. You cannot take a fried egg and put it back. It's not the matter of the broken shell of the egg. It's a matter of the denaturation of the protein. But then you say, well, this is a very high temperature. So we can move to a simpler experiment. Take a piece of meat and just put it on the table. Leave it on the table for a day or two, or milk or cheese, and you'll see the result. This will be the result. It will get rotten because of the temperature. The place of proteins is in the, if you want to store it for a long time, is in the deep freezer. If you want to store it for a day, maybe, it's in the fridge. But that's it. But so why God, whoever created us, made us at 37? I mean, there is something. In order to allow all the reactions that make life to run optimally. 37 degrees is the temperature in which the body, the mammal body, is running optimally. Remember, if your if your temperature is rising to 38, 1 degree, you are already sick. If it rises to 40, you are very sick. And at 42, you are dead. So the whole range of medicine is only 5 centigrade. Think about it. And we keep the temperature very tight. The movement of the temperature during the day is maybe 0.1 to 0.2 degrees in order to keep everything. But as I said, heat is a killer. And that's what happens when you take proteins and you leave them on the table. The same will be for cheese or for milk. So they are not only sensitive to temperature, they are sensitive to oxygen. So oxygen oxidizes protein and damages them. They are sensitive to mutations, to irradiation. They are extremely sensitive. So in order to evolve complex life, nature had, in parallel, to evolve also correction system, quality control system. And there are many of them. So there are chaperones, there are proteins that know how to refold the misfolded proteins. There are all kinds of correcting systems that also correct the DNA repair system that had to evolve along with life in order to allow life to get to this complexity. Otherwise, we would have been dead, immediately dead, in utero. The cell could not have been created, a single cell, if along with it, quality control system would have been evolved along evolution. And what we discovered is one of the systems, which is basically a quality control system, and I'll explain about it very very briefly. You see what happens when there are mutations. This is a little bit of cartoon, but when we are moving to medicine, it becomes a little bit more serious. So you see in a mutation there is a change, in one of the bases of the DNA, and instead of the letter O, a letter A is coming in. And the letter A is a mistake. Or a letter that will stop the whole protein from being continued its synthesis. So there will be what we call the stop codon. So the protein will become, what nature will create is half a protein or quarter of protein. It is, of course, non-functional. So there are all kinds of mutations. We shall not go into it. But in diseases, we are talking cancer, for example. Cancer is being run by oncogenes. Oncology is the medical term for onkos in Greece is a tumor. So oncogenes are driving basically all the tumors, more or less, and oncogenes are mutated proteins that their normal counterpart is functioning in the body, but once they are undergoing a mutation, they are driving tumors. So you see here in this case, it's a liver tumor. Normally, these proteins should be eliminated by a system, a proteolytic system that recognizes them. First task is to recognize them and then chop them to parts, to their building blocks, to the amino acid, and then recycle the amino acid. And this is the system that we discovered. But abnormally, somehow this disease somehow crawls underneath the radar. The mutant protein is not being discovered, and therefore it drives the malignant process. Think about other abnormality of protein, and that's aggregation. The proteins are not folded in the right way. They are aggregated, they are becoming like hard eggs, and they precipitate. The hallmark of all the neurodegenerative diseases, almost with no exception, let it be Alzheimer, Parkinson, ALS, Huntington, are aggregated proteins in the brain. These are proteins that somehow are misfolded. Instead of being recognized by the system and being removed, they are not being removed and precipitate. Here you have, for example, an Alzheimer. Look at the section. It's a cross-section of a normal brain and of a brain of a patient with an Alzheimer's disease. Actually, the brain degenerates, the cortex, everything degenerates, and you can see these plaques that are, and you see here, this is the toxic protein clump. So the normal chain, instead of making a properly folded protein, now makes this clump, aggregated protein. They precipitate in the cell, and by whatever mechanism are causing the damage. The only difference between Parkinson and ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig disease, and Parkinson and Huntington, is the type of the protein and the site of its precipitation. But the hallmark of all the brain diseases that are mostly typical to an advanced age are aggregated proteins that precipitate in the brain because they are not being removed properly. So that tells you what happens. And what we discovered is the system. Here comes part of a history. So you're always, when you're making a discovery in science, you're never the first. Somebody laid the foundation. We are working in a continuum. And there is a very interesting story about our own concept about destruction of abnormal proteins, and it's coming from Germany. It was a scientist in the University of Freiburg by the name of Rudolf Schenheimer. You can see also from the name that he is a German. And he was fired by the Nazis upon the rise of the Nazis to power, moved to Columbia University, and there he discovered that proteins are dynamic. So he didn't have the mechanism, but the phenomenon was described by him. He fed labeled amino acid. There are many ways to label materials. To animals, to rats. The animals took the amino acid, built their own proteins, but then he saw that these proteins are being removed, slowly removed. He followed the tracing. And he kind of laid the foundation to the whole field. By the way, there is a lot of literature about what happens, and I think that it teaches us a lesson that real good science, which is actually aimed at benefiting human life, can flourish only in democracies. I don't say that democracy is the ideal system, but it's clearly the optimal system. This is a very famous book. It's Hitler's Gift, the gift that he gave in the shape of the Jewish scientists that were expelled from Germany. At that time, many of them went to the United States. Some of them went to the UK, and there are 14 Nobel Prizes, 14, 1-4. on the work that was done here in Germany before they were fired, but it was awarded to these scientists when they were already outside of Germany. So just kind of an historical lesson. By the way, this book was written by Jean Madauer, the wife of Sir John Madauer, who discovered the structure of the antibodies and won the Nobel Prize for it. So she is a science historian. So it's a very interesting book about this scientist. One of them was Einstein. Einstein was not expelled from Germany, but he left Germany and went to the Institute of Advanced Sciences in the United States much earlier, but again because of persecution. So that's the story, and Rudolf Schenheimer found that proteins are dynamic, as he said, and he published a small book that came out in 1942 about the dynamic state of body constituents. So we are changing our constituents all the time, and I always say that when we wake up in the morning and look at the mirror, we think that we are the same people that we saw yesterday in the same very mirror, but this is an illusion. Actually, we exchange something between 5 to 10% of our constituents during this 24 hours period. So the proteins that were damaged by oxygen and by temperature and by mutations were removed, and new proteins were synthesized in order to replace them. And as I said, we discovered the system, but again, there was a lot of knowledge before we entered the field. One of the foundation was by another scientist, Belgian-American scientist, Christian de Dive, who discovered an organelle. An organelle is a kind of an organ, but it's a subcellular. It's an organ within a cell. So it's something subcellular, which is called the lysosome, and he found that the lysosome also is involved in degradation of proteins, but this was not specific. Not specific in the sense that this organelle kind of it takes invagination from the surrounding, convert them into vacuoles, and then pour the contents to be degraded. But that's not specific, because this little bleb contains all the proteins of the cell representative. Like if you try to sample the air in this hole, if you sample it here or there or anywhere, it will be about the same, except if you sample it just out of your expiration. When we knew about it, he won the Nobel Prize in the 70s, we realized that he can answer that this organelle can answer some of the question, but still something is missing. What was missing was the specificity. Let's say that you have 1,000 molecules of the same type, identical molecules in the cell, and only one get damaged. So you need to have a very precise pair of spectacles in the cell that will recognize this one molecule, will pick it up, degrade it, leave all the other 999 intact, and synthesize one to replace it. So this is the system that we demanded it to be, was a very highly specific, that will pick up only the proteins that need to be degraded and keep intact all the others, which this system, this organelle didn't fulfill this demand. So we went to a search, and I will not go into details, and at the very end, we found the system that Lena mentioned, the Ubiquitin system, and it's a labeling system. What happens is the following. You have a target protein that needs to be degraded, so it's being identified by the system. You can imagine that the system is like policemen that are running around in the city, and they're looking for suspects that try to break into stores, whatever, and they find somebody suspicious, and they are catching it. So in this case, the protein is misfolded, and the system identified it, and then it handcuffs it, kind of the policeman, you handcuff it, and then start the process of putting it into the blender, of destroying it. And it's being destroyed by a small protein called ubiquitin. Ubiquitin is activated, I will not go into it, and at the end, after the process is being done, it marks the protein. So it's being attached to the protein. Think about the prison in Huntsville, Texas, where the people that are executed are spending their time before the execution. What do they have? They have an orange coat, right? So this is the mark that they are going to be executed. So this is the orange coat. Ubiquitin is the molecule which is the orange coat of those to be executed. There is still a way to pardon it. So there are enzymes that can cut the ubiquitin and remove it and pardon the protein if it behaves well and it gets refolded. But if not, then it's being executed. And it's being executed by a big complex. It's a scissors, it's a blender, you can imagine, that the protein binds to it. Ubiquitin is basically a glue, if you want to think about it metaphorically. It glues the victim to the blender, to the scissors, to the cutting machine. It brings it together, then it opens and bangs, it goes in and cut into pieces. This is a very, it's not being cut into the very basic building block, it's being cut into longer pieces, and that's critical. The fact that we are all sitting here tonight without masks after the pandemic is this process. Think about the immunization. You know, everybody talks about Moderna and Pfizer. What is it? The messenger RNA. What is the messenger RNA? This is the molecule that I showed you that is in between the DNA and the protein. It's synthesized as part of the viral protein, of the capsid of the virus. So there is a long piece. The ubiquitin system recognizes this protein that was synthesized by the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. It takes this protein and cut it into pieces, and these pieces are stimulating the immune system to generate antibodies. So one of the many functions of the ubiquitin system is to generate these little peptides that are immunizing us against flu, against pneumonia, against whatever we are taking these days in order to protect us from current winter maladies and from future pandemics and so on. So this is a very important role, one of many roles of the ubiquitin system. The system, along the years, by other researchers, was found basically to be involved in every fundamental cellular process. I will not go into it. Many drugs were developed that are using the system as a platform. And the reason is very simple. Think about it. If some of you are physicians and you are looking at the textbook of medicine, you will see that the third part of any textbook in internal medicine are numbers. We are living by numbers. Medicine is the profession of numbers. It's not mathematics. It's simple numbers. We have certain height, we have certain weight, we have certain size. All the parameters, the biochemical parameters, blood pressure, sodium, potassium, everything is number. And deviation from the number can mean a disease. The same for proteins. Proteins are being synthesized and degraded all the time, and they are kept in the green level. If something happens and a protein will be degraded excessively, it will go down beyond the normal level. If there will be a mutation, the system will not be able to handle it, like I showed in mechanism of cancer or in the mechanism of brain diseases, we shall have an increased level of the protein, and we again may succumb to a disease. So once people identified diseases, they started to develop drugs, and I will not go into the whole drugs, but I'll just mention there are many drugs against different stages in the system. And one of the drugs that was mentioned by Lena, bortezomib. Is a very successful drug against one type of blood cancer, which is called multiple myeloma. It's a disease of the lymphatic system, so lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, are multiplying in an uncontrolled manner. They occupy the space of the entire bone marrow, and they push aside all the other cells of the bone marrow, the white blood cells, the thrombocytes that are involved in coagulation, the red blood cells, and so the patient is suffering lots of symptoms. When I was a medical student in the late 60s and early 70s, people died of the disease in no time. Maybe they lived 6 to 12 months into the diagnosis, and they died in agony. Now the clinical landscape of the disease has changed dramatically. Some of them are being cured completely, but many of them respond to the treatment, and they live 10 and 15 years with high quality of life. It's really a major change in a common disease, and the drug is an inhibitor of the system. We shall not go into the mechanism. I just give you, this is the drug, bortezomib, but there are many new variants of it. It's a simple molecule. And here you can see a patient. You don't see the patient, but you can see the disease. You can see the galloping, the stampeding level of the antibody. It's a biomarker that is secreted by the B cells, by the lymphocyte. So this is pathological. It goes well beyond the normal level. Here start the treatment with this Valcade. This was the initial name given by the company, PS341, and the patient is going to complete remission. the patient is disease-free. In order to make it even more illustrative, you can look at the bone marrow of the patient. You can see the malignant bone marrow, very homogeneous with 41% of tumor burden, that after treatment, the tumor cells went to 1% and even lower, and this is a monotherapy. Now we are combining it, the physicians are combining it with other drugs. So this is the end of this one. I just want to summarize more with two philosophical comments. One, again, the idea that in order to develop a complex life, we need quality control side by side. And, you know, the two major beneficial factors that are driving life, which are temperature and oxygen, are also the most deleterious one. So, you know, it's like we have to choose between, you know, the worst or the good of the two worlds. So these are the drivers of life, oxygen, of course, and temperature, of course, but they are the most toxic agents to the body, and therefore nature has to evolve very important quality control system in order to put the damage at bay, to control the damage and to put it in bay. The other comment is a personal one. You know, I started in medicine, and medicine is a profession that you treat the patients one by one. And in surgery, if you have a complex operation, you can spend 12 hours and more in the operating theater. I think that if you are lucky enough in science, you can impact the lives of millions of people without even knowing them. So in that sense, I think that I'm lucky because I saw the system develop from a concept that there must be something behind the lysosome that is involved in specific protein degradation, all the way to very efficient drugs, and we are just at the beginning. The first drugs are for cancer, but the new drugs are coming, are for brain diseases and for other main killers. So I would say that it's quite rewarding. So let's move now to the other part, and that's the personalized medicine. And I'll explain you the principles of the revolution, but more I will go to a kind of a hidden part of this revolution, which is the ethical part. That we put very little attention to it, and I'll alert you to what's going on there ethically. So everyone wants to remain young forever, but at the same time, not only beautiful, but also healthy. And the question is whether it's possible. Well, if we look at the lifespan of people, I'm not talking about beauty, we are not in a beauty salon here. But if we look at lifespan, around 125 years ago, at the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century, the average life was about 45 to 50. People died of infectious diseases. They killed people. There was no antibiotics. There was no vaccination. There was no X-ray. There was not even imaging. I'm not talking about CAT scan or MRI. Konrad Wilhelm Röntgen, actually this was the first Nobel Prize that was awarded in 1901 in physics, discovered the X-ray only at the very end of the 19th century, and it became commercially available only at the beginning of the 20th century. And that's in our eyes now a very primitive way of imaging. So there was nothing, there was no medicine, basically. Of course, there was no communication, no telephones, no nothing. People didn't travel to conference. They couldn't disseminate knowledge. So also communication was not there. So medicine was very, very primitive by all measures, and people died from anything. And so the 20th century is regarded by many as the magic century, because we managed, not we, the community, managed to expand lifespan from 45 to 50 all the way to 80, 85. So we added like 60% to our lifespan. It's amazing. People don't think about it, but it's really amazing achievement, which is all due to science and technology, all due to science and technology. This is something that we still fail to teach the politicians, what science and technology and higher education means. It's all coming from universities. There is no doubt about it. And so the question is whether this trend is going to continue. Also now, we are continuing it, but we are starting to kind of flatten the curve. So the prediction is that people will manage to live about 110, 115 years, but then they will succumb. They succumb to burden of mutations, to aging tissues, and so on. There will be transplantation, of course, and techniques to correct genes and so on, but at the end there is an end of life to biological system. There is so much that they can sustain. Nevertheless, the biological system is amazing. Think about a car. You can buy the most expensive Mercedes in the world. You can pay, I don't know, €1 million for it. After 10 years, you kick it out. And during the 10 years, the car didn't drive at all, basically. Think about it. You drive to work 1.5 hours a day, 2 hours a day. Saturday, many people don't drive because they rest. If you make calculation of the life of a car, the most expensive and the most efficient one, the high quality, it's around 1 year of non-stop running. 1 year? We are living 80, 90 years, non-stop, day and night, holidays, Saturdays, non-stop. From time to time, we need the machine shop, which we call hospitals in a modern language, but otherwise we are okay. I mean, most of us are okay. And it's an amazing machine. So, and we still try to improve it and to squeeze more out of this lemon. But there is an end to it. So the question is whether there will be a cure to all diseases. Again, if you think about history, about 100 years, 120 years ago, people didn't die of cancer. Why? Because they didn't live long enough to get cancer. People didn't die of heart attacks. Why? Because they didn't live long enough to get heart attacks. People didn't live of Alzheimer's because Alzheimer's is not a disease of the youngsters. Alzheimer's and all the brain diseases are bona fide diseases of the more advanced age. Actually, all those three groups of the killers, the brain, the vascular, and the malignancies, are all quality control diseases. Dysregulation of quality control, if you think about it. The brain diseases, I talked about them. The heart, the vascular, the accumulation of cholesterol is our inability to remove the accumulating cholesterol in the vascular system. And the same for cancer, again, our inability to remove oncogenes and mutated proteins. So these are all compromise or kind of exhaustion of the quality control machinery that are so important for our life, the fact that they should function properly. And when they start to get exhausted and to fail, these diseases start to show up. So the question is whether we are going to defeat them. Probably yes. I think that with heart diseases we are doing quite well because it's mostly installation. It's like, you know, stenting and valves, artificial valves. So I think that we are doing well. We still cannot make an artificial heart. Think about it. There are no artificial heart. We still need to rely on transplantation. We failed colossally during the last 5 decades in generating a transplanted heart. Cancer is also, we understand much more, and people are living now longer with cancer. Immune therapy, the drug that I showed you about multiple myeloma. So people are living now longer, but still cancer is #1 killer. Maybe shoulder to shoulder with the vascular diseases, and brain diseases are still waiting for us. We are really behind brain diseases and curing them. So this is, you know, once you overcome cancer and you are managing with the vascular system, you encounter the next enemy. Once we are going to defeat all three, we don't know what's behind the corner, like the people that lived 150 years ago didn't know what's behind the corner. So maybe, but I think that with the knowledge of the genome, I think we are more or less covering what we should expect. Of course, that living longer has its own problems. Not that I'm against researching how to live longer, but it has an economic impact, a huge economic impact. People are not working. You know, we are retiring normally at the age of 65, 68. This belongs to Bismarck, you know, and he didn't even dream that people will live that long. So these people don't work, so they don't generate income, and they are falling on the shoulders of the young generation or on their savings. And the longer we live, the less the savings are sufficient for decent life, so think about it. Also, if you look at curves of healthcare expenditures, you will see that we are spending about 90% of our life health expenses in the last 10 years of our life. And the more we are approaching the end, the steeper the curve becomes. You know, we need care of people, we need the home for, you know, caring homes. It became kind of very complicated, and there is no way that the state or insurance company can cover it. We need to to take more out of our pocket in order to protect this phase, the very last phase of life. So because until the age of, normal people, until the age of 60, 70, we get immunization, as I said, from time to time we need some repair, we are okay. But then comes, probably at the 9th decade or 10th decade of life, it becomes much steeper, and we are consuming much of the expenses on health that somebody has to provide. And of course, the insurance company and the health funds are limited, and they also limit what we call the health basket, what we are supposed to get from the company and what we have to take care ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about what we are doing, how medicine is look like, and I will concentrate because of because of lack of time, and I don't want to spread too much only on drug development. But medicine is moving into several directions. It's going into engineering, into real bolts and nuts engineering, like changing hip, changing joints, using metals and materials and so on and so forth. And we are managing okay, not on all joints, but we are managing okay. Heart valves, either from artificial or coming from animal and being processed. So we are moving on that. So that's one type of engineering. The other type of engineering that is less familiar to people, less known to people, is what we call genetic engineering or cellular engineering. We are able to take cells, or not yet, and engineer them to function so they can replace non-functioning cells in the body. Think about diabetes, for example, which is an epidemic. It's a real epidemic, diabetes, and it's a severe epidemic. It's a very severe disease once it's really kind of blown up, both in kids, type 1, and in adults, type 2. We'll not go into it. It's a lack of a hormone called insulin that regulates the sugar level. What insulin is doing, it puts the sugar into the cells, and it allows the cells to use it as a source of energy. When we are lacking insulin, we are actually drowning in an ocean of sugar in our blood, but it's a useless sugar because it cannot go into the cells. It cannot be used in order to generate energy, so people are injecting insulin. But the injection, you can inject once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, but in the body, the cells, the normal pancreas, is injecting it all the time. If I eat a little bit of a piece of chocolate, my sugar goes up a little bit, immediately little of insulin, it tightly regulated, comes in and put the sugar into the cell. So it's tightly regulated. We cannot do it with outside injection. And the patients are suffering from all types of, from hyperglycemia, it jumps up, from hypoglycemia, it goes down. It's very difficult to regulate. So the idea was to develop cells, stem cells, that will express insulin. We failed thus far, but this is one type of engineering, what we call cell engineering or molecular engineering, doesn't matter. The same for Parkinson's disease, when we are losing some types of cells in the brain that are controlling the stability. The fact that you are sitting here so quietly and stable on your chair shouldn't be taken for granted. It's a balance between two systems, the system that wants to move you and the system that stabilizes you. And once we are losing the stabilizing system, we are shivering. And that's what happened in Parkinson's disease. We are losing the adrenergic system, and we are letting the cholinergic system, which is the opposite system, the shivering system, the shaking system, to operate. And the people cannot do anything, basically. They cannot button their shirt, they cannot cut their food, they cannot dry after the shower, they cannot do anything. They are basically paralyzed. So people are trying to generate cells that will kind of revive the adrenergic system. This is type of another engineering, which I'm not going to talk. So we talk about metal, bolts, and nuts engineering. We are talking about genetic engineering. But drugs are all, and of course, operation and so on. So, and imaging, these are all developments that medicine is moving, but I want to talk about drugs, which is drugs have always been at the very root of medicine. When we are rushing to the apotheke and buy whatever we need, but people don't ask themselves, well, how did it come to the apotheke? When I ask kids, oh, they said the truck brought it. So where the truck come from the factory, and how the factory made the drug. So it's a long story. So I want just to talk about drug and the drug development. It's again all about history. So the first generations of drugs that were not developed. It was serendipitous, complete serendipity. Take penicillin. the first antibiotic. It was completely serendipity. Sir Alexander Fleming, a British microbiologist. Here you can see a Petri dish. A Petri dish is on which we are growing bacteria. It's what you see here, the nice blue is kind of a nutritious medium. It's actually transparent. It's called agar. And you see the bacterial smear that is growing here. So this is bacteria. And that's how microbiologists and molecular biologists are working all the time. So Fleming forgot a dish on the table open for the weekend and went away for the weekend. And when he came back, he found that a spore of a fungus that was in the air is contaminated, fell on this nutritious medium and grew up to generate a colony. Typically what people are doing, they will see it, they will kick out the dish, the whole dish, they will throw it. But Fleming had good eyes and he saw that there is a halo here. So the bacteria couldn't grow all the way to the halo. So he surmised that the fungus is secreting a material that he called antibiotics. Anti, against, bios, life. Biology is the profession of what is life. So he was not a chemist, and two other people, Ernst Chain, and Ernst Chain, by the way, also was a German that went to the UK. They won the Nobel Prize for this discovery. And Howard Florey purified the material, and penicillin was already used during the invasion of the Allies in the D-days, when there was hundreds of thousands of wounded soldiers. So this was the first event that antibiotic was used, penicillin was used. But then people learned the principle that fungi secrete antibiotics. Now companies are synthesizing it chemically, but then streptomycin was discovered that was secreted not by penicillium fungus, but by Streptomyces, by Waxman in Rutgers University in New Jersey. So many antibiotics came to the market soon after the discovery of penicillin, and there is no doubt that the discovery of antibiotics changed the world forever, even nowadays with the development of resistance. So this was serendipity, but we cannot rely on serendipity if we want to cure diseases systematically. So then again, science came to our help. It's not that, it's typically, you know, when you look at the development of science from 30,000 feet, you can see the trend. You identify the missing brick in this building, but you don't have the technology to answer the question. So people realize that, okay, if we want more antibiotics or if we want to cure more diseases, we need more techniques, but the techniques are part of the development of science. There are scientists like us that identify the biological system, and other scientists are busy with developing technologies, let it be imaging, microscopy, and so on. And the two approaches are like a cogwheel. They are necessary in order to the machine to move. One cannot move without the other. And once you're discovering a system, then the next question must be answered only by development of the appropriate technology. So it's going back and forth all the time. So the next development is the achievement of modeling of different diseases in cells, in animal models, and the development of chemistry, synthetic organic chemistry. In order to synthesize any compound in chemistry, there are steps. You're moving from A to B to C until you're getting to Z. Not all of them have all the steps, but think about artemisinin, which is an anti-malarial drug. It takes 40 steps in order to synthesize and there are many intermediates. So people say, oh, we have millions of intermediates. Let's group them into families that have something common structurally and try them without having any hypothesis on disease models. Let's say that we have a cancer, a breast cancer. So we isolated cells from a tumor in a woman and we let it grow in what we call tissue culture in the lab. We let it grow in the lab. So let's take the million molecules and try them one by one on these cells in order to see one compound without knowing any mechanism that will stop the rapid division of these tumoral cells. So it's not going like I described you. If you go to the big companies, you're going to Roche, you're going to Johnson & Johnson, you'll see the big machines. So the cells are going in little wells, tiny wells. On this size kind of a dish, there are 384 wells, tiny little wells. And there are robots that are going to the compounds, and 384 little tiny capillaries are sucking the sample of the compound, go to the cells, put it on top of it. The cells are being carried back to the incubator. The next day, they are being carried to the microscope, and with a very sophisticated software, the microscope screens the lines and can tell you that in line number 9, on letter L, there is something. It's called the hit. It's not far away from being a drug, but there is something that inhibits the growth, the division of the cells. So you take it out and then start the development. Toxicity, availability, pricing, synthesis, and so on and so forth. So all in all, it's a several billion-dollar type of a process, which takes about several good years, 5 to 10 years to develop. Now we are trying to shorten it, again by technology, which I'll point out. So this is what we call the second revolution, unlike the first one was serendipity, is called high throughput brute force screening. We don't know the mechanism, we try one by one until we find one. And apparently we find a lot of drugs like that, and one of them are the statins. Statins is a very successful drug. It inhibits the biosynthesis of cholesterol, which is the occluding lipid that occludes the lumen of the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries are the arteries that bring blood to the heart itself. Heart is like, it's a muscle, right? Like any other muscle in the body. And it gets blood supply, but apparently the vessels that bring the blood supply to the heart are very sensitive to accumulation of this lipid, of this plaque, and it's like rust, that you let the rust develop, and then it occludes the whole lumen, and then once the whole lumen is occluded, the patient drops dead or half dead with what we call myocardial infarction or heart attack in the popular language. So statins that were developed by, that were discovered by Akira Endo, a Japanese scientist, what he did is screened a library of Japanese plant products, pure Japanese plant products, against biosynthesis of cholesterol. And he found one. And then Park Davis, an American company, bought it from the Japanese company and developed the first statin. And statin has become probably the best-selling drug ever in multiple billions of dollars. And still it's there. Very heavy in the market. So this is an advanced stage of developing drug, but again, this is not satisfactory. And again, people started to complain, not people, the community said, well, this is not enough, we need to move further on. And why they started to complain, and that's what they developed, that's what is being developed these days, we developed the personalized medicine, or the 4 Ps. It's not only personalized or precise in the language of President Obama, but it's also predictive, preventive, and participatory, and I'll try to explain very briefly what it is. Why people were not satisfied with the old system, because the old system works on models. Cells are not human beings, and even mice are not human beings, and the side effects are different, and the variety is different. You know, mice are typically belonging, for those of you who are coming from the world of biology, there are about 3 or 4 mice strains that are being tested. It's the B57 and the bulb and whatever. There are not 2 human beings that walk on the face of Earth out of 8 billion people that walk on this planet that are identical to one another. Not even identical twins. The identical twins are identical at the very beginning, but then they start to divert epigenetically. So they're what we call its modification. The DNA is identical, but then there is another level of regulation which is called epigenetic, above the genetics. So there are all kinds of modification of the DNA that make people different. They are exposed to different diet, different climates, different everything. So therefore, there is no wonder. I'm not talking about the fact that we are men and women, tall and low, young and old, sick and healthy, but we are different genetically from one another. Not 2 people that walk on the face of Earth are identical to one another. Therefore, the model, the animal model and the cell model failed in many ways. It was successful, but to an extent. But it failed because people showed side effects. Some people don't tolerate the drug, you know, penicillin sensitivity. Some people have pain here or anaphylactic shock. Some people respond well. Some people respond only partially. It's a whole game. When you start a drug on a patient, you can expect everything, from no response to full response, from no side effects to the most severe side effect. And therefore, we needed a more personal tool. And the personal tool came with the technology, of course. And that's exactly, you know, what I just told you. When we have a group of patients at the same day, let's say breast cancer patients or prostate cancer patients or Alzheimer patient, and we start what we call the gold standard treatment, and we follow the patient, they divide into 2 groups. Some of them are benefiting from it, either cured or benefiting, and some of them are keeping on deteriorating, dying, or the disease becomes severe. And we didn't have any predictive tool. The predictive tool was statistical. When a woman asked or a man asked the doctor, "Doctor, tell me what are my chances of being cured or living in 5 years, being with the family," the doctor could tell them 20%, 90%. Said, "Doctor, but I have a name and I have an ID card number and I have an address and I have kids and husband and wife. What is these numbers?" He said, "You know, dear lady or dear sir, I'm sitting in this office for the last 30 years. I've seen 2,000 like you, and these are the numbers. 2/3 of them were cured. Unfortunately, 1/3, whatever." So this was it. We didn't have any real scientific tool to tell the patient, based on a test of the patient, what is going to happen to you. And that's where medicine is going nowadays. And this is the variety that I was talking about. And it's all based on these two people. You know, when you have to grade the importance of discovery in biology, no doubt that the discovery of the structure of DNA is the biggest discovery in biology and medicine in this century. There is no, in my mind at least, no doubt. Everything is based on it. The whole modern medicine, genetics, everything is based on it. This is Francis Crick, and this is Jim Watson. Jim just died a few weeks ago. Francis died in 2013, about 13 years ago. And they discovered the structure of DNA. And now we are able to sequence the DNA, and we are able, initially the first sequencing of the entire genome was like 7 years and about almost $1 billion. Now we can do it in no time. We can also do section of the DNA, like only oncogenes we can sequence, and tell what is the cancer that drives the breast cancer of a woman. So we can take a sample from the cancer and really make a prognosis for the woman and tell, unfortunately, you have, you know, RAS mutation, or fortunately you have this mutation or no mutation, or and so on. And we can do a much better work in not only predicting, but mostly in fitting the treatment. So that's the whole idea behind. And you see that it's going even to the popular science, that the next generation, the drugs of the future will be based on our DNA. And basically what we are moving is, we are moving from one-size-fits-all medicine that, you know, chemotherapy, mastectomy, remove the breast, radiation, destructive radiation. We are going now to what we call the tailor-suit medicine. So we are going to tailor the drug to the patient. We are not going to synthesize, people have a misconcept, we are not going to synthesize a drug for each of the 8 billion people that are walking on the face of Earth, but we are going to stratify diseases to groups. So we are taking 10,000 samples of breast cancer, and we are being able to identify all the mutations that are causing breast cancer, and there are about 15 to 20 of them. And then to fit a drug to each of those 15 or 20. And now, computational computer sciences came a lot to our help. You know, remember, there were a group of scientists that got the Nobel Prize. I mentioned the Nobel Prize because it's highlight major discoveries for deciphering the structure of a protein. Kendrew and Perutz, the two British scientists from Cambridge, got the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of the first protein, which is myoglobin, the protein that moves the muscle. Then Ada Yonat from Israel got the Nobel Prize with Ramakrishnan for discovering the structure of the ribosome. Now people don't need it anymore. There is AlphaFold. So based on the structure of many proteins, you can just plug in the sequence of your protein, the amino acid, and it will throw out the model. Not very accurately, but it's becoming more accurate as time passes. And they got the Nobel Prize just a year ago. So they developed algorithms that can predict the structure. Once you have the structure, first of all, you don't have to waste 10 years on crystallizing your protein because you get it in nanosecond. And then the computational chemist can come and dock in a small molecule that will modulate or inhibit or accelerate the activity of this protein, because now you know exactly what drives it. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, what really determines the function of the protein is the three-dimensional structure of it. So once you have it at hand, you got it. So it's not that easy, but I think that it paved the way very quickly. And think about the COVID-19. COVID-19, from the day they had the first patient to the day that there was already an immunization, a vaccine in the market, 10 months. 10 months in 2020, I think. I think that I got the first shot in Israel. It was in December of 2020. I think that the pandemic in Israel started in March. I think that in the world it was a little bit earlier, February or January. This was amazing. Why? Because they sequenced the protein, they made the messenger RNA, they injected it. There was a lot of luck there, but nevertheless we are shortening the way, and we are also shortening and decreasing the price in a big way, because the issue of accessibility of drugs is a major economic issue. So this is what's going on. We are using the DNA to sequence. We are then predicting the sequence of the protein. We are predicting the structure, and from the structure we can go on and develop the drug. I just show you one example, just to illustrate to you. These are biopsies that are being taken from a biopsy of a breast cancer, and you can see woman A and woman B. You know, here you can see one lump, here you can see several islands, but what happened here, not only sequencing, because sequencing will not talk to you a lot, but staining with an antibody will tell you the story. So the two antibodies, the two samples of the two women were stained with one antibody against a mutated estrogen receptor. A mutation in the estrogen receptor, which is one of the female hormones, is one driver of breast cancer. And you see that the antibody managed to stain this one, but nothing happened here. So this woman has a mutation in the EGF receptor. This woman does not. She has something else because she has cancer. Maybe she has a mutation in the EGF receptor, So she should be treated with Herceptin, which is an antibody that drives the degradation of the EGF receptor, while this woman should be treated with tamoxifen, which counteracts the activity of the mutated estrogen receptor. So we have drugs that are specific to the mutation, while beforehand, before we were able to sequence the DNA and to identify the mutation, these two women were treated identically. We took the breast away if she had no metastasis, that the cancer spread to other tissues. We irradiated them, we give chemotherapy, which is toxic. It was awful. Now we are talking about drugs that almost don't have any side effects and are much more efficient because they are really missile directed at the target. So that's the whole essence, the diagnosis. So beforehand, we treated a disease. Now we aim to treat a disease within a context of an identified patient. So that's the main difference. The mirror flips from treatment a disease by a name, breast cancer, to a disease that resides and has evolved in a patient that has a name, an ID card, and an address that we can really sequence the DNA and identify the real cause of the disease. So we talked about Herceptin. If it's progesterone receptor, we are talking about another anti-progesterone receptor, and then unfortunately for now there is the triple negative. So it's not estrogen, not progesterone, and not EGF, but there is cancer. We still don't have the answer to the triple negative, which is a very aggressive cancer, by the way, but we are on the way, not we, the scientific community is on the way. So let's go now a little bit to, and with that we'll conclude, to the ethical issues that are concerned. So the idea is the map. The roadmap is to develop a cancer atlas, but not a cancer atlas, a disease atlas, to sequence 5,000, 10,000 of each disease, to identify all the mutations, and accordingly to model the proteins that are involved, and then to develop the drug. So this is the map, and we are already in. So there will not be one day that the New York Times or the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung will say, hey, it's finished, it's there, January 20th, 2032. No, we are already in, and we are moving step by step, and already in every modern hospital, you're going to oncology, they will already analyze, they're analyzing all the tumors for the mutations and so on. So we are already inside it. So let's go a little bit to the ethical issues of this knowledge, of this type of knowledge. When you are studying in medical school, or everybody understands that the three pillars of medicine are disease, patient, and treatment, right? That's what medicine is all about. The patient that has a disease and how to treat it. This is all going to change in a dramatic way. So the disease, remember, this is the old disease. So you're taking the pulse, you're measuring the temperature, you're doing some X-ray, the nun holds the baby while the mother cannot get up. And the disease was defined as a state that we don't feel good enough in order to get up in the morning to go to work, more or less. We have fever, something like that. The new disease is going to be a molecular disease. So it's going to be something in our, not always, by the way, there are environmental diseases. I don't want to generalize, but I'm giving you just a kind of a general picture. So think about it. Think already on the first ethical issue that here. Now, beforehand, in order to discover cancer, the patient has to come in to complain. Hey, I have a abdominal ache, I am anemic, I feel very weak, and you see that the patient is pale. Maybe there is a leukemia that occupies the bone marrow and there is not enough red blood cells and so on. Now there are biomarkers, and the biomarkers can discover disease much earlier. Circulating tumor cells, we can discover it in the blood, much before the disease becomes symptomatic. So think about it, newly developed blood test can detect cancer 4 years before conventional. So what does it mean? Let's say I think that I'm healthy, but if I'll do some testing, people tell me, hey, you're carrying a mutation in P53, in MYC, in RAS, and whatever, and you are sensitive, you are, maybe in 10 years or 5 years, you'll develop a disease. What does it mean? Am I healthy or am I sick? Think about it. Now, this question has a meaning, a real meaning. It's not only philosophical that will not let me sleep at night, nicely, peacefully. It has a meaning for the insurance company. It has a meaning for the family, for the kids, that may carry the same mutation. It has a meaning for the employer. It has a lot of meaning, despite the fact that formally, according to the old definition, I'm not sick. But I may carry a time bomb that may explode, and I'll show you one time bomb in a minute. So think just about, what happens there. Think about the patient. Why the patient has to get a heart attack at the age of 55 if I can discover already in the sperm or in the egg the mutation in the cholesterol that will evolve. Typically, by the way, if you think of the big killers, they're chronic. So they evolve along decades. In order to get Parkinson, it takes like 20 years because we have a lot of reserve. So the cells start to degenerate, and only when they get to 20% level of the normal level, then the patient becomes symptomatic. The heart attack, the occlusion doesn't occur when the patient is running a marathon and succumb and people say, hey, the guy was running every day 20 kilometers and all of a sudden he got a heart attack. No, it's not all of a sudden. He developed it along 4 decades. When the Americans made autopsies on soldiers that died in the Korean War, they discovered already the beginning of the occlusion of the coronary artery at 18 years old young soldiers that were killed in the battlefield. So it starts very early on. So we are moving backwards in our analysis in order to identify the disease early on, in order to prevent it. First to predict it, and if we can predict, we can prevent. Go on low cholesterol diet, do this, do that. So once we know better, but the question has also societal meaning. What does it mean for all the surrounding, for the insurance company, for the employer, for the family, and so on and so forth. So the patient is going, so the disease is going to change. And the meaning, the early diagnosis, and the patient, and of course the treatment. We may go from, in some diseases, from drugs to correction of the DNA by CRISPR-Cas. And there was a trial to prevent, I will not go into it in details, a Chinese scientist tried to prevent AIDS in twins. The code name for the twins was Nana and Lulu. And in order to prevent AIDS, because the mother had AIDS, and the delivery via the delivery canal, was supposed to kind of infect them, though the gynecologists now develop a technology that is 100% safe. Either it's a cesarean section, but even normal delivery. They can prevent AIDS from the newborn, from an infected mother, 100%. So it was not necessary. People suspect that this guy wanted to get to Stockholm. We'll not go into and then there was a huge condemnation that the experiment was too early, without preparation, and the Chinese themselves kicked him into the prison. I'll not go into it. But gene editing that was initially discovered by 2 women that got the Nobel Prize, Emmanuelle Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, is the solution, basically. Once it's going to be safe, and there will be not what we call off-target effect, that we are not going to cause damage to other genes on the way, and if we are correcting just the damaged gene, this is probably the future, and people are already using it in some of the diseases, some muscular degeneration diseases, and they're using it successfully. So the treatment is going to be very different than the treatment that is being used. So you see that these pillars are going to change, and they have a lot of ethical issues. What does it mean to be sick? What does it mean to the environment? And of course, the price. The price is going to be enormous. Of those treatments, they are very expensive. I'm not going to go into all this, but I think that the companies, the pharma companies, are hating us, the scientists, because we are going to end the blockbuster drugs. One chemotherapy for breast cancer. All the women with breast cancer took cisplatin or whatever. No, that's going to end. There will be 15 different drugs for 15 different breast cancers. And of course, if the market slice is going to be shared by 15 drugs compared to one drug, and they're going to make 15th of the earnings, they're going to increase the prices, and we already see it. So the fact that medicine is going not to be accessible, especially in poor countries, but also in societies that not all the people have the same access to the same type of health services, for me as a physician, and for you, I assume, should be bothering, should be major bother, because medicine is, I always think that that health is such a fundamental product that all people are entitled to have the same very level of health providing services, like whether you are rich, black, white, religious, secular, whatever. Doesn't matter. This is a very fundamental product, like education, for example. So here there is, of course, an issue of an ethical issue that is coming again, and that's the ability to protect information. People are going now in the hospitals. You heard about hackers that go into the computers of hospital and have, I'm not talking about credit card and banks accounts and all kinds of other crimes, but this is a very explosive type of information. Let's say that I'm always imagine, okay, I'm sitting in my lab, and I have a chest pain, okay? So I suspect maybe at my age it may be heart attack. So I walk to the emergency room in the nearby hospital, and the doctor is coming and say, Aaron, we did the quick sequencing, and I have good news for you and bad news. Start with the good news, you don't have heart attack. Okay. What are the bad news? That we found a mutation in APO4E, and this is a gene with high susceptibility to Alzheimer's disease. Jesus Christ, I came for a chest pain. I didn't come for Alzheimer's disease. And then again, what you are doing with the diagnosis? I'm healthy. I'm a little bit forgetful at my age, but it's, there is always a joke about forgetfulness that people suspect, oh, I forget the name. People are meeting me when I walk on the beach in Israel, and, they can talk to me forever and say, how is my family and so on, and I have no clue who they are. So you develop a technique of how to talk to them and make them think that you know them. But my doctor, even if that I'm doctor, I have my own doctor. I'm not the physician of myself. Tell me, you don't have to worry about it. If you forget your key, it's okay. But if you forget what to do with the key, then you are in a problem. So remember this one. But the genetic privacy of the sequencing is and it's going to be hacked. There is no doubt about it. Hackers will always find a way to hack it and then to ask for ransom, either from the hospital or from the people, and be prepared for the big genome leak. And this is all taken from Nature and Science, so people are ready for it. And I'm going to conclude with this beautiful lady, with Angelina Jolie, that at the summer of 2012 came with an announcement that she's going to remove her breast. Why? Because her mother died of breast cancer, and her aunt, the sister of the mother, died of ovarian cancer, and the two diseases have one common gene, which is called BRCA1, breast cancer number 1, a mutated gene that with high susceptibility, with high chances, causes breast cancer. It's breast cancer is 80%, and ovarian cancer with 40%. It's huge. And unlike breast cancer, ovarian cancer is lethal. It's a lethal disease. So she decided to take the breast away as a preemptive step, and she did a great service to the public, of course, by announcing it, encouraging women, and to go. And then the next summer, she took out the ovaries. So she did a complete. Now they try to avoid taking the breast by following the patient, so they change the policy, but the ovaries are always out. But then again, what she's doing with her kids, besides her adopted kids, she has also her own kids. What you are telling them, that they might carry the mutation. And again, I believe that Angelina Jolie doesn't have a problem of employment or a problem with the insurance company, but normal people that live on salary, you know, the insurance company may revoke the insurance policy. Why did they have to deal with such people that have this story? So again, you see the ethical issue that is being bound. So let me really conclude now. There is an old Jewish saying that says that the one who is more knowledgeable is also more troubled. The more we know, the more troubled we are. So I didn't come here to frighten you. That was not the purpose. I think that it's always the case in science, I think that that is science, that you first identify the problem and then you are going to solve it. That has always been the case, and scientists are on the way to solve these problems. New treatments are coming all the time to the market, new genetic treatments and so on and so forth. So I think that these treatments, this revolution is really extremely meaningful. It will bring modern drugs that will be more efficient with less side effects. And I believe that unlike drug discovery that was a single drug, like antibiotic that revolutionized medicine, this is probably the broadest revolution that medicine has undergone ever in its history. Because you can sequence the entire genome, and you can jump on all the mutations that are causing all the diseases. So I think that the breadth of this revolution makes it different than any other major discovery in medicine, but on the other hand, it is very much promising a better future. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Aaron, for touching on so many topics and raising important questions. And I'm sure there's also a lot of questions in this room. We will hurry up with questions because it's already a bit late and we don't want to take too much of your time away, but we have time for questions. So, your chance. One over there.
Hello, thank you very much. I wanted to ask, how does knowledge of the mechanism of ubiquitin lead to the creation of medicine?
The creation of drugs?
Yeah.
Well, again, it went by steps. So people looked at diseases and say it may be linked. So let me give you an example of the multiple myeloma, which is a little bit more complicated. So multiple myeloma, people knew, let me bring you a metaphor. A production line of Chevrolet in Detroit. Okay, you are making 10,000 cars, and they are going via quality control machinery, and 10 out of 10,000 are being kicked out. So they're not going to the franchise to be sold, and they're going either to repair or to the garbage. The same is occurring with protein synthesis. You are synthesizing proteins, and you are sending them either into the cell or out of the cell, doesn't matter, and the ubiquitin system looks into them and says, this is a good protein, this is a bad protein, the bad protein is being destroyed. In the case of multiple myeloma, this disease, the proteins are going out of the cell. These are globulins, actually antibodies, that are secreted by the cell. And the ubiquitin system also has kind of a station on the way out. And it can check and it controls it. Now, the malignant cell in multiple myeloma generate not 10,000 cars, that only 100 of them or 10 of them are being kicked out, but it generates millions of cars. So the percent-wise of protein that are defective is higher. So instead of 100 cars or 10 cars that have to be kicked out of the million molecules, 100,000 or 10,000 molecules have to be kicked out. So you are saturating the ubiquitin system. It's still okay. It can handle it. It's in excess. So then people surmise and say, okay, let's inhibit the ubiquitin system a little bit. So it will not be able to take care of all these defective proteins. So they inhibited it by inhibiting these scissors, this blender, and they knew a priori that when the cell accumulates abnormal proteins, it dies, it kills itself. It's called the unfolded protein response, the UPR. Again, I try to avoid all kind of technological jargon, and it induces programmed cell death. It forces the cell to commit suicide, and that's what happened. So the beauty of this drug is that it's not a chemotherapy. And basically for cancer, no single drug will ever handle any cancer, almost. You always need a combination. Cancer is like water. You block the window, it will come from the door. You block the door, it will come from the electric outlet. You block the electric outlet, I don't know, it will come from the air conditioning system. It's like water. So one of the weaknesses or the strengths of cancer, that it's a very sneaky disease. Patients always develop good response initially, and then they escape. And then you need to go to a second line of defense and a third line of defense. So typically the physicians will try to start with 3 or 4 drugs that will try to block all the entries. So because this drug is so different from chemotherapy and from irradiation, you can combine it with other drugs. Because it's not mimicking any other mechanism. It forces the cell to commit suicide. It's not chemotherapy that is typically a chelator of DNA. So therefore, that was the thinking and the development. And then other diseases fell in about the same frame. Other question. You look to be frightened. It's okay.
I have a question.
Where are you?
Here, on the side.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I see.
yeah,
I
maybe
see.
it's, I'm just wondering about the proteasome, because it chops up the proteins and you have all the peptides coming out. Is there, because there is also not there's different types of proteasomes, right? There is the normal proteasome and the immunoproteasome. Is there any way to engineer the proteasome in a way that you can determine which peptides you get out? Can you modify how the proteins are chopped into different peptides?
Well, I thought that this is a Ubiquitin meeting or what? I feel
No,
like I'm in a Ubiquitin meeting.
I never thought about it because I just know that it chops up.
I was just kidding.
Actually, it's like, it sounds random, but is it random?
No, it's not random at all. The proteasome has 3 sites, and it always will cleave next to certain amino acid, okay, to generate peptides. The peptides, it has a trypsin site, a pepsin site, and glutamyl, 3 sites, trypsin, chymotrypsin, and peptidylglutamic hydrolyzing sites. So 3 sites that are on the beta subunits of it in the middle of the complex. So they will always, so these peptides are not ideal antigenic peptide. They still have to go further processing by an enzyme that is sitting, it's a metalloprotease that sits on the ER, and it's called ERAP, ER-associated protease, that was discovered by Fred Goldberg initially. So then they are being further trimmed, the proteasome products are being further trimmed to the ideal peptide, and that is being recognized by the immune system. So it's kind of a 2-step process. But it's really amazing because the immune system is so sensitive. Basically, those peptides, 99.9999% of them are immediately further degraded by amino and carboxypeptidases. They trim them and kill them. Only 0.0001% is being recognized by this ERAP that I just mentioned you and are being presented to the immune system and stimulate the whole process of antibody production. So you don't engineer the proteasome currently, to the best of my knowledge. It has its own, but it's working optimally for the immune system. But the final product is not the product that the immune system is seeing. It needs to go a little bit of trimming on both sides.
And I would have a second philosophical question, but I can also have. Okay, about the testing, because you mentioned that, of course, in the end, we will start testing more broadly for mutations and whatever. But of course, also testing for something is not for free. So we also have to, if you start screening people and sequencing is getting cheaper, but still it costs something. And in the end, we will always trying to balance, is it worth testing for it and for the sake of finding the perfect treatment? Is this something that in the end only the developed countries will do and will just increasing the gap between the developing between the countries, or do you think at some point that's where we're going to?
It's not a philosophical question, it's a practical question. First of all, let's trim it. Let's put things in proportion. Not all diseases are genetic, and there are diseases that are environmental. Take pandemic, for example, infectious diseases. So we should really put it in proportion, but a large proportion of diseases have a genetic or a mutational element. And genetic people always think about inheriting it from the parents, but of mutations, of, that we can find it. Now, screening is extremely complicated, because how frequently we are going to screen? Every year? Because now you don't have mutation, and during the summer vacation you are going to Santan in Cannes on the beach of the French Riviera, and you get a mutation. So how frequently we should screen? That's endless. And against what? Against endless diseases. So for the time being, we are limiting it to people that have, in well-developed countries, that have a susceptibility story. Let's say that you have cancer in the family, like Angelina Jolie and so on. So you screen only for the relevant mutations. It's very interesting economically also, because the companies, at the end of the day, are very cruel. They prefer that people will get sick, and they take care of the sick one, because you screen and you find, let's say, there is a question of screening smoking people for lung cancer. So the question is, of course, of the irradiation of the screening itself. If you have to do it frequently, the screening itself may be costly health-wise. Not costly financially, but costly health-wise. And then you need to have manpower. Now we are trying to change it to AI. When I say we, I mean the community. That the AI will go over the thousands of X-ray, the chest X-ray, to find the one that is suspicious for a lesion in the lung. So how frequently you do it, and who will pay for it? At the end of the day, the philosophy of the companies, of the health insurance company, that they will have one lung cancer patient that will die, and they will take care of him, then having screening and repeated screening, and all the radiologists and the AI go over it. So there is a constant fight here that is being started now between, the public, or those that understand, that want to prevent disease. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, it's much better to prevent disease than to treat a disease, especially if the disease is fatal. And the economic interest of the companies, that they don't care. They say, out of a huge repeated screening, we'll have 1 patient, 2 patients, we should take care of them. So it's a very heavy economic question, and we have to work with the forceps in order to decide whom to screen, when to screen, how frequently to screen, who will cover it. And for now, it's going only for people that have a heavy family story of a certain disease.
Yeah, we have another question over here.
Thank you for the amazing lecture. I had a question also about ethics, but on the other side of ethics, that we are now at this stage that technology and medicine can do a lot of stuff, treat a lot of diseases, but due to a lot of bureaucratical and ethical laws, we can't do it. And what's your opinion of the future of developing drugs? What could be maybe what ethical aspects we can reconsider, and how maybe we can stop our scientific progress in this area?
I think that I pointed out, or I tried to point out, the ethical issues. It's the pricing, of course, of the modern drugs, which are very pricey. Again, because some of the diseases are very rare. When you don't have a market, of course, the price of the drug will be skyrocketing if there are only few cases. then the will of the companies to go into it. Think about antibiotic and antibiotic resistance. Companies don't develop antibiotics anymore. Why? Because it doesn't work. You have to put billions of dollars in developing antibiotic. People have a short-term inflammation. You take it for 5 days and you are done, and that's it. So you don't, the companies prefer drugs that you will take for a disease that you can live with for decades, and you will take the drug forever. Hypertension, diabetes, whatever, that you will take cholesterol, high cholesterol, whatever. That's their interest, that every month you will go to the apotheke, put 100 euros, take the drug, and you will repeat it for decades. That's what the company saw. Antibiotics are out of production. There are no new antibiotics coming to the market, and that's a big concern. So this is, you can argue that this is an ethical issue, that they develop what brings them earnings, what brings them money, and what the public needs, which raises questions about the role of governments. What is the role of a government? The government builds hospital, right? They pay the salaries of the physician. Why shouldn't they also incentivize the pharma companies to make drugs that are in need? It also belongs to the same very story. The government funds education. The government funds security, the military. So why shouldn't they also help to incentivize by subsidies, by whatever, development of drugs? But they don't do it. So they left this niche kind of untreated. So this is another example of ethical. I can think of many others ethical issues that are embedded in this revolution. I hope that I answered your question at least partially.
Okay, time
Let's
for
take
two more questions. Yes.
I want to get to my flight tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much. So mine, I think, is fast. So you mentioned, for example, the genome editing system based on CRISPR-Cas before. So the person that discovered the CRISPR repeats, who was, by the way, a Spanish scientist, didn't see the potential when he discovered it.
Right.
When you were with Ubiquitin...
It's Mojica, I know him.
Exactly.
It's a Spanish guy. You are Spanish, aren't you? Yeah, so I can tell from the accent. Yeah, so the guy who discovered CRISPR-Cas, Mojica discovered a defense system of bacteria against invading viruses. But he didn't, and it was very important discovery, but he didn't relate it to gene editing. And the two women converted it into a gene editing technology. So now this is, I don't know, I'm not sitting on prize committees, so I cannot decide. I would have given him the prize, because they built on it, the two women, they built on it. But I can bring you many examples of such cases. Even in our case, we didn't discover ubiquitin. Ubiquitin was discovered by another guy that worked in the Rockefeller University, and he didn't know, he called the protein ubiquitin, and he left it. And we gave it a meaning. Whether he deserves the prize, I couldn't care that he will be next to me in Stockholm, so for me it doesn't matter. But he didn't get it, because he didn't find the meaning. Another example which is coming up to light that you may not be aware of, which is very interesting, is the discovery of Rosalind Franklin, the woman that discovered the double helix. Actually, she had the X-ray that Watson and Crick did have the theory, right, correct, but they didn't have a very strong supporting experimental evidence. And then they didn't steal. They looked at her X-ray, and they found it, and this confirmed for good their theory about the double helical structure, and they published the paper. Actually, their paper and her paper were published back-to-back in Nature, edition in '53. Now, the issue is not that she didn't get the Nobel Prize, because she died before, and according to the rules, she cannot get the Nobel Prize posthumously. These are the rules of the prize. So, but the issue was the chauvinistic attitude to her. But then I read her biography, and then I read the critique of the biography that was written actually by a good friend of mine, by Ada Yonat, who discovered the structure of the ribosome. And she kind of defended them, not the stealing, but she said, listen, Rosalind had the findings, the X-ray in her drawer for 3 successive years, and she didn't know the meaning of it. She kind of procrastinated on it without publishing it because she didn't have the meaning. Actually, only when they took it from her and they told her what is the meaning, then she published the paper. So you see, it's kind of, it's a delicate issue. Forget about the Nobel Prize. She couldn't have received the Nobel Prize according to the rules of Stockholm. She died, they got the prize in 63 or 4, and she died in the late 50s. So she couldn't have gotten it, by the way, from ovarian cancer. So she couldn't have gotten it, but the chauvinistic attitude towards her that forced her to leave the institute came to light even recently in the eulogies of Jim Watson. If you read Nature and Science, you see that the eulogies were very mixed. You know, on one hand, they kind of crucified him for his personality. On the other hand, they glorified him for the discovery. So it was a very mixed story, just recently, in the last few weeks. So this is another example that doesn't belong to the Nobel Prize, but to accreditation, that to giving credit that she had the findings. She had the structure of the DNA much before they thought about it. She couldn't decipher it. She didn't know what to do with it.
When you discovered the Ubiquitin system, were you aware already of the huge potential?
No, of course not. Of course not. Not only that, I'll tell you another, and that maybe we'll conclude with it with another, not joke, but some humoristic statement. We knew that it's novel. So this modification, people knew about how proteins are modified. This is an expansion. If you think about it globally, this is an expansion of the genome. The genome, people thought, has all the information, but not. There are many post-translational modification of protein that add and expand the genome. Phosphorylation, acetylation, doesn't matter. I will not. So people knew about small molecules that can modify protein, but they never heard about a protein that is being activated in order to modify another protein. So we knew it's important, that it's novel, but we didn't know that it's novel, that it's important. We knew it's novel, we didn't know it's important, and the importance came from other people. Then people that worked on very important proteins like oncogenes and so said, hey, the system that you discovered is degrading my protein and this protein and cycling and cell cycle, and then started an avalanche. So we did the biochemistry, the initial biochemistry, and that, by the way, the philosophy of the Nobel Committee, they give the prize to the people that had the first drop coming out of the rock, like Moses, to hit the rock with a stick and got little drops of water. But then let me conclude with a statement. You know, we are in science and we are publishing papers, and many of them are rejected and you have to revise them. So there is a letter sent by the editor to the author of a paper. I'm very happy to tell you that your paper is both novel and important. However, the novel part is not important and the important part is not novel. So that's what happened. So, okay, thank you very much.